Welcome back to None of the Above. Between the COVID-19 pandemic and the UK's departure from the European Union, yeah, remember that whole thing? The British government is scrambling to find drivers to deliver fuel to gas stations across the country. This comes as panic buying over the weekend left long lines of customers waiting to fill their tanks. The panic buying began last week after reports made by the media said that a handful of gas stations had to close due to dwindling supplies. Now, because of those reports, over the weekend in the United Kingdom, cars lined up outside gas stations, with many being forced to close their doors after supplies did, in fact, eventually run out. Joining us now to discuss is Brandon Daniels, Exiger's president of global markets. Brandon, thanks a lot for taking the time to be on the show tonight. So both the government and petrol companies in the UK have said, hey, there's plenty of fuel available, just needs to be delivered to the gas station, sort of like a last mile delivery sort of issue. Just how significant is all of this? It does seem to be proven a bit, just the fragile nature of the supply chain, yes?
Yeah, thank you for having me on, and thank you for your time this evening. I mean, so the issue in and of itself creates the demand, right? So the fact that people are concerned about the potential for a fuel shortage increases panic buying. Now, in traditional times, we may have been able to fend off these kinds of concerns. We may have been able to address them through higher volumes of lorries going out to these petrol stations. We may have been able to address concerns through discourse with the public, but the pandemic has set a new standard for what supply chain disruption can mean to the average consumer, right? I mean, how often has it been, and at least the last 40 years, that you'll go out and you'll try to get paper goods and you can't get them. You'll want to, there's a huge DIY community and economy that's springing up in the UK that's been unable to get lumber for the last 9 months. And so people are feeling this at a consumer level every day. You'll go into, shopping marts today, and there will be shelves empty. People are already getting ready to buy early certain Christmas goods, right? There are warnings that turkeys and hams, which are very traditional holiday fare in the UK, will not be available. And so when you look at what the pandemic has done to create a level of urgency in the consumer when it comes to supply chains, this is unprecedented. And so is it a concern? Yes, it's a concern, because people are going to react with fear. People are going to react and try to address a problem proactively that would naturally work itself out of the market. But right now, they're not able to do that because the experience that people have had with supply chain disruption has been so material and so real.
Okay, so Brandon, so is this, it might be a bit of both here. Is it that the supply chains themselves have tightened because production around the world for supplies and assets and equities were forced to shift? Or is it that individuals sort of learned the art of the pandemic panic of like, what do you mean there's no toilet paper? What do you mean I can't get hand sanitizer, right? And so now we're all living this like sort of hyper psychological freaked out world where we think, oh, what do you mean there's no turkeys? I'm gonna go get my turkeys right now. Or is it sort of a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. I mean, There was a poll done of companies in the EU and the US trying to understand how much revenue loss they attributed to supply chain disruption over the last 2 years. And the number was staggering. It was about $4 trillion. And supply chain disruption due to climate change, due to cyber attacks, due to the pandemic, which has been an anchor point for all of the rest of our supply chain disruption that we might have been able to manage previously, have created situations in which everyday goods that the consumer feels are now subject to major disruption. And so that reality of revenue loss, of major constraints in the supply chain, coupled with this pandemic fear, the art of the panic buying, right, is creating an additional constraint on the market. And it's one that the UK government is taking proactive steps to address. I mean, they've called in the military. You saw the business secretary start to talk about having the military essentially take on the role of tanker drivers. You heard the transport secretary Schaaf say that they were going to start to take precautionary measures to make sure that petrol was rationed. So you are seeing the government take corrective actions to sort of assuage fears, but there is a reality of supply chain disruption. And we see that in microchips, right? We're going to lose 8.5 million cars and $210 billion in the auto space this year, right? And then there's the art of the pandemic and dealing with supply chain disruption, which consumers feel really uneasy about.
Okay, so finally, before I let you go, how do governments, at least maybe here in the U.S., and businesses need to better work together so that people don't have to worry about their petrol and their turkeys flying off the shelves?
Yeah, so the front line is obviously the industry. And I think we're going to see a slight regression from just-in-time inventory and a lack of vertical integration in companies. You know, companies have sort of moved to horizontal integration as global logistics have become significantly better over the last 20 years. I think we're going to see a little bit of a retrenchment into inventory management and into vertical integration. Companies are going to buy those companies that help them fulfill their supply needs. And I think the government needs to ensure that industry is doing this and doing this with tools that allow them to have visibility into their supply chains. So it's not good enough that you just know who you're buying from. You need to know who they're buying from so that you can spot bottlenecks, so you can spot these issues in the future. And I think governments also have to have a level of reform when it comes to domestic supply chains or supply chains that are more diverse. Because you know, what happens is 2 or 3 tiers down, when you get to raw materials, we're all using the same silicon providers. And so one glitch, one fire disrupts an entire supply chain today. That's an untenable situation.
It certainly is. It's a very important one that we will continue to follow very closely, especially here, Brandon, as we get closer to the holiday season. We've told people that, I mean, hey, we've brought them a reporting before that says, you know, yeah, you may want to consider buying gifts a bit earlier than usual, but panic buying is something different altogether. Okay, Brandon Daniels, right. Exiger is president of Global Markets. Well, yeah, for sure. Okay, Brandon, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate you being here on the show tonight. Thank you. Coming up on the show, my